Hello all, and welcome to Stingray Tom's Florida and another Take 5 for Florida History. Hopefully this will be a short video, at least I'm expecting it to be as I begin writing, so if this part makes the final edit, I'll have achieved my expectations. Today I'll be discussing the topic of Florida cracker culture. In reality, this is a huge topic that has been discussed in many good books, but I wanted to give a brief frame of reference to help with videos I'll be making in the future. Florida cracker culture is an important part of the early American development of Florida and significantly influenced tourism from its beginnings in the mid-19th century on through to today. That's the main reason I'm discussing it. While I'll touch on a few places in the state where people can connect with cracker culture later on in this video, I'll leave most of that for future videos. Sometimes background information requires more than a minute at the beginning of a main video. So to start, let's look at the name. Usually that's the first question people ask when hearing the term Florida cracker. Simply put, the Florida cracker was created with the colonial-era British settlers in what was Spanish Florida. In 1763, some 13 years before the Declaration of Independence was written, Spain ceded the territory of Florida to the British. This was the first time that essentially the entire Atlantic coast of North America was in the possession of Great Britain. Since Florida bordered the colony of Georgia, and the Spanish had never really settled the territory, the new possession provided a reasonably easy location for people from the 13 colonies and Britain itself to settle. Additionally, the Spanish had killed or removed all of the indigenous population, and the only natives in Florida were ones that were pushed out of Georgia and the Carolinas. The British control of Florida only lasted 20 years, and in 1783, the Spanish would receive the land back. Many of the British and Americans who had moved into the area left in what is often called an exodus. While most of them didn't stay, it was that non-Spanish colonization that was the first to be named crackers. There are several origin stories that explain the name cracker in Florida folk history. Many authoritative and generally useful books will share one or another of the origin stories and state that it's the correct one. They are all interesting and sound possible, and I'll be the first to tell you I am no expert on the subject. The one thing I do know is that usually the least interesting origin story is often the correct one. That's one of the ironies of history, and it appears to be the case here. Briefly listed, competing stories include that Florida crackers were named after the cracking of corn that was performed to make cornmeal, a staple of their diet. Or it was from the cracking sound of the large whips Florida's cowmen used to herd cattle. Or it was tied to cracker barrels. I'm speaking of the way soda crackers were sold in the South, not the chain of restaurants currently located at every exit of southern interstates. Of course, while the term Cracker Barrel was the source of the chain's name, actual Cracker Barrels only became common in the 20th century. So where does that leave us? Well, rather unexcitedly, we can turn to the early usage of the word cracker, which in England in the 1500s was commonly used to describe people who were braggarts and know-it-alls. It came from Middle English usage of the word crack, meaning entertaining conversation. Think of Cliff Clavin from the TV show Cheers as an example. This usage is even found in William Shakespeare's play King John. By the mid-18th century, cracker was used to describe the backwoods settlers in the southern colonies. Evidence of this comes from a letter to William Legge, the Earl of Dartmouth, which stated, "I should explain to your lordship what is meant by crackers, a name they have got from being great boasters. They are a lawless set of rascals on the frontiers of Virginia, Maryland, the Carolinas, and Georgia, who often change their places of abode." It was these crackers that would be the first British settlers of Florida. As I said previously, the majority of these crackers left Florida after the Spanish returned. Politically, they were nearly all supporters of the British Crown, and as such knew that living under Spanish rule was likely to be dangerous. But returning to the other British colonies during the American Revolution was likewise treacherous. They left businesses, farms, and even small plantations behind, though these were not abandoned for very long. After the United States gained its independence, new settlers from Georgia and the Carolinas would illegally cross the border into Spanish Florida and resettle the area. Since they quickly filled the roles that the original crackers had created, they were also called crackers. While the new settlers and the few remaining original settlers weren't wanted by the Spanish government, it did little to stop them. Because of a lack of manpower and, more importantly, a lack of political will, the Spanish did little to monitor the nearly 400-mile or 640-kilometer border with the new nation. Development in the northern part of the territory continued, with the settlers mostly complaining about the developing Seminole communities, which included escaped black slaves that were also entering Florida at the same time. It's clear from the usage of the word cracker that I've mentioned that it was considered a pejorative or negative term when used to describe these Florida settlers, but the settlers would accept the name and use it to describe themselves. So it developed into a bit of a paradox, and this is how it's viewed today as well. The descendants of those original settlers and later settlers who would follow once Florida became a U.S. possession in 1821 often proudly refer to themselves as Florida crackers. On the other hand, it has also been used to describe some, if not all, white people in Florida, especially those who are considered backward and racist. While it's a complicated issue, many historians use Florida cracker as a neutral descriptor for aspects of Florida's culture that are specifically connected with the early white, non-Spanish settlers in Florida and their descendants. Many of Florida's museums and heritage organizations use the term, and this is what I generally mean when I use the phrase Florida cracker culture. If you follow my channel, you'll know that I do my best to illustrate the history I share with both historical and contemporary images, both from my archive and from the hundreds of thousands of photographs I've taken around the state. Illustrating culture isn't the easiest thing to do, so what you've been watching are photos from several of Florida's outdoor heritage museums, which display early examples of Florida cracker houses and other buildings. In a future video, I'll explore these collections in greater depth, including some of which also include non-cracker buildings. But for now, they're mostly just a backdrop. They do, however, show one of the more tangible aspects of cracker culture, one which is thankfully connected with tourism, or else why would I be talking about them? These simple pine log and board structures with shingle or metal roofs were used for every sort of building throughout much of the state from the 1700s through the early 20th century. Indeed, some are still being used today, albeit with modern touches. Early Florida tourists in the 19th century, and later, even up into the 1950s, would have visited roadside attractions that were housed in cracker-style buildings. Rail depots, gas stations, guest cottages, general stores, and post offices were all built in what is commonly referred to as the Florida cracker vernacular architectural style. The next two things I want to mention are cracker cattle and cracker horses. Both are domesticated animals whose ancestors came from Spain. The histories of these breeds are intimately connected, and they are both Florida state heritage breeds and are protected. When the Spanish began to colonize Florida, they brought horses, cattle, and even hogs. The early cracker settlers were able to buy Spanish cattle and horses, as well as round up loose ones in the forests and swamps. Being bred in what was essentially Florida's closed ecosystem, they evolved to better handle the environment, and today they are genetically distinct from other Spanish cattle and horse descendants, such as those in Mexico and the southwestern U.S. There are also Florida cracker art and craft styles that are unique, based on local materials used or the evolving methods within isolated Florida communities. And then there's cracker literature and poetry. Ironically, the most famous and successful chronicler of cracker life within the pages of their writing wasn't a cracker, and didn't even consider themselves to be a Florida regional writer. Marjorie Keenan Rawlings was born in Washington, D.C., and didn't move to Florida until the age of 32. However, the Rawlings short stories and novels that are based on her experiences and observations in and around the small community of Cross Creek near Gainesville did more to introduce Florida cracker life to the rest of the U.S. than any other source. While this is an introduction to the Florida cracker culture, I wanted to share some of the better places in the state where visitors can learn and see more. For all sorts of great information on Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings and her life in Florida, you can visit her home at the Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings Historic State Park. In fact, you might want to check out this video where one of the 10 historic buildings I discuss is her Cross Creek home. Located at the Florida State Fairgrounds, Cracker Country is a collection of early cracker homes, businesses, and other buildings. Unfortunately, it's typically only open during the fair and for school groups. The good news is that when it's open, it's staffed with people who are not only knowledgeable about the buildings and their uses, but some of them are craftspeople who are practicing their crafts and sometimes even have some to sell. Fort Christmas, which is located in eastern Orange County near the St. Johns River, is similar to Cracker Country, but in addition, it has a recreation of the Seminole War era fort as well. They are open more regularly, but typically only have staff in and around the buildings for special events. That's probably the best time to go and learn as much as possible. Located in Newberry, the Dudley Farm Historic State Park is a working farm with over 30 buildings and other structures. Visitors can learn farming techniques that were common in Florida from the 1850s up through the 1940s. Due to its location on the Florida Cracker Trail, which I'll discuss in a future video, Soulful Springs is not surprisingly home to the Soulful Springs Pioneer Park Museum. It has a smaller collection of cracker buildings and an interesting collection of artifacts inside the museum itself. Thank you for watching Stingray Tom's Florida and another of my videos. I hope you enjoyed it. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more of Florida's tourism history. Stingray Tom's Florida, traveling through time around the Sunshine State.